She was breaking her body to survive 3 jobs. No sleep, no hope, when her patient pulled off the oxygen mask, whispered a secret, and gave her a gift so shocking it turned her entire world upside down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Mariah Johnson's alarm pierced the pre-dawn silence at 5:30 a.m. Her tired fingers fumbled to silence it before the sound could wake Grace in the next room. Every muscle in her body protested as she pushed herself up from the worn couch where she'd collapsed just 2 hours ago after her night cleaning shift. The small apartment was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the old refrigerator. Mariah padded softly to the bathroom, catching a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her honey brown hair was coming loose from its ponytail. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to wash away the exhaustion. "Just another day," she whispered to her reflection. "We can do this." In the kitchen, Mariah pulled out Grace's favorite lunchbox, a purple one with unicorns that they'd found at a thrift store. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar routine, spreading peanut butter and jelly on whole wheat bread, cutting it into triangles the way Grace liked. She added a small apple, carefully polished until it shone, and a handful of baby carrots. The kitchen counter still bore the marks of last night's homework session. Grace's math worksheet with gold star stickers and a few stray colored pencils. Mariah smiled, remembering how her daughter's face had lit up when she got all her multiplication tables right. She scribbled a quick note on a napkin. "Have a wonderful day, my sweet girl. Remember, you are brave, you are smart, and you are loved. Mommy." These daily messages were their special tradition, a way to stay connected even when work kept them apart. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the small kitchen with its rich aroma. Mariah leaned against the counter, letting her eyes close for just a moment. Her feet ached from hours of mopping floors at the office building, and her back was stiff from lifting trash bags. But there was no time to rest, not with bills to pay and a growing daughter to feed. At 6:15, she gently pushed open Grace's bedroom door. The nightlight cast a soft glow over her sleeping daughter's face, peaceful and innocent against her pillow. For a moment, Mariah's throat tightened with emotion. Grace looked so much like her father. The same gentle curve of her cheeks, the same dark curls. "Time to wake up, sweetheart," Mariah called softly, running her hand over Grace's hair. Grace stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mommy?" she mumbled sleepily. "Good morning, sunshine. Ready for a new day?" Grace sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Did you sleep on the couch again?" Mariah's heart squeezed at her daughter's perceptiveness. "Just for a little while, baby. Now, let's get you ready for school." While Grace got dressed, Mariah prepared a quick breakfast of oatmeal with cinnamon and sliced bananas. She added a drizzle of honey, a small luxury she always made sure to keep in the pantry because it was Grace's favorite. "Can you braid my hair today?" Grace asked, climbing onto a kitchen chair with her bowl of oatmeal. "Of course, sweetie." Mariah's fingers worked quickly, weaving Grace's dark curls into neat French braids while her daughter ate breakfast. It was these quiet morning moments she treasured most, even through her exhaustion. "Mrs. Martinez says we're having a music assembly today," Grace chatted excitedly. "Can I take piano lessons someday, Mommy, like Jenny does?" Mariah's hands paused briefly in Grace's hair. Piano lessons weren't in their tight budget, but she hated saying no to her daughter's dreams. "We'll see, honey. Maybe when things are a little different." Grace nodded, accepting the answer with the resilience that sometimes broke Mariah's heart. Her daughter had learned too young to understand about waiting, about making do. As they gathered Grace's backpack and lunchbox, Mariah caught sight of the stack of bills on the small desk in the corner. The red final notice stamp on one envelope seemed to glare at her accusingly. She quickly turned away, focusing instead on helping Grace with her coat. "Do you have your homework folder?" Mariah asked, running through their morning checklist. "Yes." "Library book? Got it. And what about your beautiful smile?" Grace beamed, showing off the gap where her front tooth had recently fallen out. "Right here!" They made their way down the 3 flights of stairs to the street, where the sky was just beginning to lighten. Their breath made little clouds in the chilly morning air. The city was waking up around them, delivery trucks rumbling past, early commuters hurrying to the subway station, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. "Remember, Mrs. Rodriguez is picking you up after school today. Mariah reminded Grace as they walked the 4 blocks to school. "I'll be home by 7:30, and we can have spaghetti for dinner." "With meatballs?" "With meatballs," Mariah promised, though she'd have to check their food budget carefully to make it work. Outside the school gates, Mariah knelt to give Grace a tight hug. "I love you to the moon and back," she whispered their familiar goodbye. "And to all the stars, too," Grace finished, squeezing her mother's neck before skipping off to join her friends. Mariah watched until Grace disappeared into the building, then checked her watch. She had just enough time to make it to the hospital for her shift. Her scrubs were already packed in her bag, along with a sandwich and an apple for lunch. The hospital was a 15-minute power walk away. As Mariah strode through the awakening city, she mentally reviewed her schedule: 12-hour shift at the hospital, then home to Grace for dinner and homework, then back out for her evening waitressing shift at the diner. She'd given up her cleaning shift for tonight. Her supervisor had understood when she'd explained she needed one night to catch up on sleep. In the hospital staff locker room, Mariah changed into her blue scrubs, pulling her hair back into a fresh ponytail. She stifled another yawn as she pinned her name badge to her pocket and clipped her ID card to her lanyard. The familiar weight of her stethoscope around her neck helped her straighten her shoulders, pushing aside her fatigue. "Focus on the patients," she reminded herself, the way she did every morning. "They need your best self." The fluorescent lights of City General Hospital buzzed overhead as Mariah made her way to the nurses' station. Her comfortable white sneakers squeaked against the freshly waxed floor, a sound that had become as familiar to her as Grace's laughter. Despite her exhaustion, she managed a warm smile for her colleagues. "Morning, Sarah." Mariah called out to the charge nurse, who was buried in a stack of charts. Sarah looked up, her gray hair escaping from its neat bun. "Mariah, thank goodness you're here. We've got a special assignment for you today." She lowered her voice. "VIP patient in room 512. Mariah's heart sank. VIP patients usually meant entitled personalities and impossible demands. "Who is it?" "Ethan Callahan." Sarah handed her a thick medical chart. "CEO of Callahan Enterprises. Just had emergency gallbladder surgery last night." The name sparked recognition. Mariah had seen his face in the business section of newspapers she'd cleaned off executive desks during her night job. The tech billionaire? The one and only. Sarah's expression grew serious. "Watch yourself with this one, honey. They say he made his assistant cry just for bringing him the wrong kind of water." Mariah flipped through the chart, scanning his medical history. "Any specific care instructions, besides treating him like he owns the hospital?" "Which he practically could," Sarah shrugged. "Regular post-op protocol, but he's already scared off 2 nurses this morning." Taking a deep breath, Mariah gathered her supplies: fresh bandages, antiseptic, a digital thermometer, and a blood pressure cuff. She could handle difficult patients. After all, she'd managed 3 jobs while raising Grace alone for the past 5 years. The walk to room 512 felt longer than usual. 2 security guards stood outside, their presence adding to the tension. They checked her ID badge before letting her pass. Mariah knocked softly on the door. When no response came, she entered quietly, pushing her supply cart ahead of her. The private room was spacious, with large windows overlooking the city skyline. Morning light streamed in, highlighting the stark whiteness of the walls and the sophisticated medical equipment surrounding the bed. In the center of it all lay Ethan Callahan. He was younger than she'd expected, probably in his early 40s. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, but somehow that only added to his commanding presence. Even in a hospital gown, propped up against pillows, he emanated authority. His fingers moved swiftly across a tablet computer, his attention completely absorbed in whatever he was reading. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan," Mariah said professionally. "I'm Mariah Johnson, and I'll be your nurse today." Ethan didn't look up from his tablet. His jaw tightened slightly, the only indication he'd heard her at all. Mariah moved forward, maintaining her composure. "I need to check your vitals and change your bandage. Is now a good time?" "Make it quick," he replied, his voice clipped and cold. His eyes remained fixed on the screen. "Of course." Mariah began her routine checks efficiently, years of experience guiding her movements. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm, noting how he stiffened at her touch. The machine beeped, and she recorded the numbers. "Your blood pressure is a bit elevated." "Are you experiencing any pain?" "I'm fine." The words came out like ice. Mariah reached for the thermometer. I'll need to take your temperature. Finally, Ethan looked up, his steel-gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her want to step back. But she held her ground, thermometer extended. He allowed her to place it in his ear, but his entire body radiated tension, like a tightly coiled spring. The thermometer beeped, and Mariah noted the reading. "Temperature's normal," she said, moving to check his incision site. "I'll need to examine your surgical wound now." Ethan set his tablet aside with deliberate slowness, his expression unchanged. He leaned back slightly, allowing her access to the bandage. Mariah worked carefully, her gentle hands removing the old dressing. The incision looked clean, with no signs of infection. She cleaned the area thoroughly before applying fresh bandages, all while maintaining a professional distance. "The incision is healing well," she reported, disposing of the old bandages. "Do you have any questions about your care?" Ethan picked up his tablet again. "No. Are we done?" "Yes, Mr. Callahan. I'll be back in 4 hours to check on you again." "Fine." His attention was already back on his screen, dismissing her as effectively as if he'd waved her away. Mariah gathered her supplies, keeping her movements quiet and efficient. As she pushed her cart toward the door, she couldn't help but glance back at her patient. In that brief moment, she caught something in his expression, a flicker of something beneath the cold exterior. Was it pain? Loneliness? Whatever it was vanished so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. She stepped out into the hallway, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The security guards barely acknowledged her as she walked past them, pushing her cart back toward the nurse's station. Sarah looked up expectantly. "So, how was Mr. Sunshine?" Mariah managed a small smile as she updated the patient chart. "Let's just say I understand why the other nurses asked to be reassigned." Her hands moved automatically, recording vital signs and observations, but her mind kept returning to those few minutes in room 512. In all her years of nursing, she'd dealt with difficult patients before. The angry ones, the demanding ones, the scared ones hiding behind harsh words. But Ethan Callahan was different. His coldness felt more like a wall than a weapon, as if he'd built it brick by brick over years of keeping people at a distance. She would know. She'd built her own walls after losing Tom, though hers were made of smiles and gentle deflections rather than ice and silence. "You okay with keeping this assignment?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. "I can try to find someone else." "No," Mariah said firmly, closing the chart. "I can handle it. Besides, we both know we're short-staffed as at Island." Sarah squeezed her shoulder. "Just remember, you're one of our best nurses. Don't let him make you think otherwise." Mariah nodded, but as she headed off to check on her other patients, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Ethan Callahan than his fearsome reputation suggested. What kind of man commanded such power, yet seemed so utterly alone? The fluorescent lights of the hospital lobby cast a pale glow over Grace Johnson's small form as she sat cross-legged on one of the worn waiting room chairs. Her backpack lay open beside her, stuffed animals peeking out alongside her school books. On her lap, a fresh sheet of paper waited for her artistic touch, while scattered crayons created a rainbow around her. "Just stay right here, sweetie," the kind receptionist, Mrs. Bennett, called from her desk. "Your mom will be done with her round soon." Grace nodded, her pigtails bouncing. She had been here many times before, waiting for her mom after school when their usual babysitter was sick. The 7-year-old knew the routine. Stay where mom could find her, be quiet, and draw pictures to pass the time. But today felt different. The lobby seemed extra quiet, and Grace's fingers itched with curiosity. She had already drawn 3 pictures. One of their apartment, one of her mom in her nurse uniform, and one of their cat, Whiskers. Now she was running out of ideas. A doctor's cart rolled past, and Grace's eyes followed it down the hallway. Through the open door at the end, she could see more interesting things. The nurse's station, patients' rooms, and the soft beeping of machines that always made her think of spaceships. Looking back at Mrs. Bennett, who was now busy on the phone, Grace made a decision. She carefully gathered her crayons and paper, stuffing them into her jacket pockets. Maybe she could find her mom and show her the drawings. Or maybe she'd find something new to draw. The corridor seemed bigger when she was walking it alone. Grace trailed her hand along the wall, reading the room numbers as she passed. Some doors were closed, but others stood open, showing glimpses of people in hospital beds. She waved at a few who noticed her, earning tired smiles in return. Then she came to room 412. The door was partially open, and inside sat a man who looked different from the other patients. He wasn't old or sleeping. Instead, he sat upright in bed, focused intently on a laptop balanced on the rolling table in front of him. Grace paused in the doorway, studying him. He wore a hospital gown like the others, but something about him reminded her of the businessmen she saw downtown. Serious and important looking. His dark hair was neat despite being in the hospital, and his face was clean-shaven, though his expression seemed stern. "Hello?" Grace said brightly, stepping into the room. The man's head snapped up, his fingers freezing over the keyboard. His eyes, a striking blue-gray, widened slightly at the unexpected visitor. "This is a private room," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that usually sent adults scurrying away. But Grace wasn't an adult. She simply smiled wider. "I'm Grace," she announced, pulling a crayon from her pocket. "Do you like to draw?" For a moment, Ethan Callahan just stared at this small intruder, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. "I don't draw," he finally said, his tone softening slightly despite himself. "Everyone can draw," Grace insisted, approaching his bedside with the confidence only a child could possess. She pulled out her slightly crumpled paper and held it up. "See, this is my mom. She's a nurse here." Something flickered across Ethan's face. Recognition, perhaps. "Is she now?" Grace nodded enthusiastically. "The best nurse ever. She takes care of everyone." She looked around the room, taking in the expensive-looking laptop and the phone that kept buzzing with messages. "Are you sick?" "I had surgery," Ethan replied, surprising himself by answering. There was something disarming about this little girl's directness. "Oh." Grace's face turned serious. "My mom says surgery means you're extra brave." She pulled up a chair, much too big for her, and settled in it. "Want me to draw you a picture? It might help you feel better." Before Ethan could refuse, Grace was already at work, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Despite his usual irritation at interruptions, he found himself watching her small hands move across the paper with determined purpose. "Do you have any kids?" Grace asked without looking up. "No," Ethan answered, his voice catching slightly. "I don't." "That's sad," Grace declared matter-of-factly. "Everyone should have kids, or at least someone to love them." She paused her drawing, looking up at him with those innocent eyes. "My daddy's in heaven now, but Mom says angels watch over us anyway." Something in Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered Mariah Johnson now, the quiet professional nurse from earlier, the one who had treated him with genuine care rather than the usual fawning attention his wealth usually attracted. "Your mother sounds very wise," he said softly. Grace beamed. "She is. And you know what?" She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Yesterday, when she came home really tired, she said you were our angel, because you're her special patient, and taking care of you means she might get a better job." Ethan felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to him with such open honesty. Grace's eyes suddenly lit up with a kind of revelation only children can have. She whispered, though her whisper was still quite audible. "Mommy says you're my angel, but maybe you're my daddy too." The words hung in the air like suspended crystal, fragile and shocking. Ethan's mouth fell slightly open, all his usual corporate composure deserting him. At that exact moment, Mariah Johnson appeared in the doorway, her face flushing deep red as she took in the scene. "Grace," she gasped, rushing forward. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, Mr. Callahan." She scooped up Grace's scattered crayons with trembling hands. "Grace, honey, you know you're not supposed to leave the lobby. I am so sorry, sir." She doesn't usually. "Mommy, I was just showing Mr. Callahan my drawings," Grace protested as her mother gathered her things. "I apologize for the interruption," Mariah said, her voice professional but trembling slightly. "It won't happen again." She took Grace's hand firmly in hers, practically lifting the child from the chair. As Mariah hurried them toward the door, Ethan watched them go, still processing what had just happened. For the first time in years, he felt the corners of his mouth tugging upward in genuine amusement. The pure innocence of Grace's words had somehow pierced through years of carefully constructed walls, leaving him with an unfamiliar feeling, something almost like warmth. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows as Mariah walked down the corridor, her stomach in knots. Her shoes squeaked against the freshly polished floor as she approached room 412. Yesterday's mortifying incident with Grace played over and over in her mind, each replay making her cringe harder than the last. She paused outside Ethan Callahan's door, clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. Through the small window, she could see him sitting up in bed, reading something on his tablet. Even in a hospital gown, he carried himself with unmistakable authority. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath. "Just apologize again and stay professional." Mariah knocked softly and entered the room. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan. I'm here to check your vitals." To her complete surprise, Ethan looked up from his tablet and gave her a slight smile. "Nurse Johnson, how's your daughter this morning?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected cold silence, or worse, a formal complaint about Grace's unauthorized visit. She's fine, thank you for asking. And I want to apologize again about yesterday. She knows better than to wander into patients' rooms." "No need to apologize." Ethan set his tablet aside. "Actually, she was quite refreshing. It's been a while since anyone's spoken to me with such honesty." Mariah moved to check his blood pressure, trying to maintain her professional composure despite her relief. Grace does have a way of speaking her mind, sometimes a little too directly. Children often do. His voice softened. "She mentioned you work 3 jobs?" Heat crept into Mariah's cheeks as she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm. "She shouldn't have bothered you with our personal matters." "It wasn't a bother." Ethan watched as she took his reading. "That must be exhausting." "We manage." Mariah focused on the numbers, not wanting to meet his eyes. "Your blood pressure is much better today." A comfortable silence fell between them as she continued her morning checks. It felt different from yesterday's tense atmosphere. Lighter somehow, as if Grace's visit had cracked open a window in a stuffy room. "Mr. Sunshine!" A cheerful voice suddenly piped up from the doorway. Both adults turned to see Grace standing there, still in her school uniform with Mrs. Bennett hovering apologetically behind her. "I'm so sorry," the receptionist began. She insisted on saying hello before heading to the waiting room. "It's fine," Ethan said, and Mariah noticed his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Mr. Sunshine?" Grace skipped into the room, her backpack bouncing. "Because you were all dark and gloomy yesterday, but then you smiled, just like the sun coming out." "Grace," Mariah warned, but Ethan actually chuckled. "Well, if I'm Mr. Sunshine, what does that make you? Little rain cloud?" "No," Grace giggled. "I'm Grace, and I brought you something." She dug into her backpack and pulled out a slightly crumpled piece of paper. "I drew it last night." Mariah watched, amazed, as her daughter handed the CEO of Callahan Industries a crayon drawing. Even more surprising was how carefully Ethan accepted it, studying the colorful scribbles with genuine interest. "This island, quite artistic," he said. "Is this me?" "Uh-huh. See the sunshine coming out of your head? Those are happy rays." Ethan's laugh was rich and unexpected. "Happy rays. I don't think anyone's ever accused me of having those before." Mrs. Bennett stepped forward. "Come on, Grace. Let's let your mom work." "Okay." Grace gave a little wave. "Bye, Mr. Sunshine. Don't let the happy rays go away." After they left, Mariah busied herself adjusting Ethan's IV line, certain he'd had enough of their family circus. But when she glanced at him, he was still looking at the drawing, a thoughtful expression on his face. "She's quite something, your daughter," he said quietly. "Yes, she island." Mariah allowed herself a small smile. "Though she can be a handful. Sometimes handfuls are exactly what we need." Ethan carefully placed the drawing on his bedside table. "Speaking of which, I'd like to make a request." "Here it comes," Mariah thought. "He's going to ask for a different nurse. I'd prefer if you could be my primary nurse during my stay." Mariah's hand froze on the IV bag. "I'm sorry, is that a problem?" "No, it's just unexpected." She struggled to find the right words. "Most VIP patients prefer more experienced nurses. You seem plenty experienced to me." Ethan's voice took on that CEO tone she'd first heard yesterday. "And you're thorough, professional, and clearly capable of handling unexpected situations with grace." He paused. No pun intended. Before Mariah could respond, the door opened and Miss Delgado, her supervisor, walked in. "Mr. Callahan, I hope everything is satisfactory this morning. Actually, I was just telling Nurse Johnson that I'd like her assigned as my primary nurse." Miss Delgado's eyebrows shot up. Oh? Are you certain about that? Completely. There was no arguing with his tone. Is that going to be a problem? No. No problem at all. Miss Delgado's smile was tight. I'll make the necessary adjustments to the schedule right away. As her supervisor left the room, Mariah felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride that Ethan had specifically requested her. Worry about Miss Delgado's reaction. And somewhere underneath it all, a tiny spark of hope. Primary nurse duties meant regular, predictable hours. No more juggling multiple shifts between different jobs. Thank you, she said softly, straightening his blanket. Though you really didn't have to. I make it a point to work with people who exceed expectations, Mrs. Johnson. His voice was professional again, but his eyes were kind. Even if they do come with pint-sized artistic consultants. Mariah laughed despite herself. Well, Mr. Sunshine, I'll do my best to live up to those expectations. Mr. Sunshine, he repeated, shaking his head. I suppose there are worse nicknames in the corporate world. As Mariah finished her morning duties, she noticed Ethan glancing at Grace's drawing again, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Maybe her daughter was right. Sometimes the sun did come out in the most unexpected places. Mariah stood in Ethan's hospital room, checking his IV one final time before his discharge. Afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the spacious private suite. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind wandered to all the paperwork waiting for her after her shift. Mariah, Ethan said, his voice softer than usual. I'd like to discuss something with you. She paused, noting how different he looked from that first day. His stern expression had mellowed, though he still carried himself with unmistakable authority even in a hospital gown. Of course, Mr. Callahan. Please, it's Ethan. He adjusted himself in the bed, wincing slightly. I'll need continued care after discharge. Physical therapy, wound management, medication scheduling. He cleared his throat. I'd like to hire you as my private nurse. Mariah's hand stilled on the IV line. I don't understand. It's simple. Daytime hours, better pay, and more flexibility than hospital shifts. His blue eyes met hers directly. You're excellent at your job, Mariah. And more importantly, I trust you. She felt her chest tighten with hope, but caution made her hesitate. That's very kind, but I have other obligations at the hospital. You'd maintain your hospital position, just reduced hours. He smiled slightly. And perhaps you could let go of that night cleaning job you're doing. Mariah's eyes widened. How did you? Grace mentioned it. She's worried about you sleeping so little. His expression softened further. She's a remarkable child. Mariah sank into the chair beside his bed, her legs suddenly weak. The possibility of giving up those exhausting night shifts, of actually sleeping normal hours, felt almost too good to be true. I don't need an answer right now, Ethan added, but please consider it. That evening, Mariah sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold beside her as she worked through the numbers on a worn notepad. The salary Ethan offered would more than make up for the cleaning job. She could keep her weekend waitressing shift just to be safe, but still. Mommy, what are you doing? Grace padded into the kitchen in her sock feet, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Just some grown-up math, sweetie. Mariah pushed back from the table and opened her arms. Grace climbed into her lap, snuggling close. How would you feel if Mommy didn't have to work at night anymore? Grace's eyes lit up. Really? You mean it? Mr. Callahan, Ethan, offered me a job helping him get better at his house. Mariah stroked her daughter's hair. I'd still work at the hospital sometimes, but not as much. So you'd be home at night? Like before? The hope in Grace's voice made Mariah's decision crystal clear. Yes, baby. Just like before. The next morning, Mariah gave notice at the cleaning service. Her supervisor barely looked up from the paperwork, just waved her off with a distracted, good luck. 5 years of scrubbing floors in the dark, and that was it. She felt lighter walking home, as if she'd set down a heavy burden she'd carried so long she'd forgotten its weight. For the first time in years, she had an evening free, truly free, with her daughter. What should we make for dinner? Mariah asked as Grace bounced around their tiny kitchen. Can we make Daddy's special pancakes? Grace's eyes shone with excitement. With chocolate chips? Mariah's heart squeezed, but she smiled. Breakfast for dinner? That sounds perfect. They worked together, flour dusting their clothes as Mariah taught Grace how to measure ingredients. The recipe had been Tom's specialty, weekend mornings filled with laughter and sticky syrup kisses. Making it now felt like keeping a piece of him alive for their daughter. Daddy used to flip them in the air, Grace said, watching as Mariah carefully turned a pancake with a spatula. He sure did. And sometimes they landed on the ceiling, Grace giggled. Really? Oh yes. Once one got stuck up there for 2 whole days before it finally fell down right on top of his head while he was reading the newspaper. Their laughter filled the small apartment, chasing away the shadows of too many quiet, lonely evenings. Soon the kitchen smelled of warm chocolate and sweet memories. They ate at the coffee table, breaking their usual dining room only rule, watching cartoons and making up silly stories about the characters. Mariah couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so present, so aware of every precious moment with her daughter, instead of worrying about the next job or bill or responsibility. After dinner, they had their usual bedtime routine, but tonight Mariah wasn't rushing through it, checking her watch every few minutes. She helped Grace into her pajamas, read 2 stories instead of 1, and listened to her daughter's prayers with full attention. Grace knelt beside her bed, hands clasped beneath her chin. Dear God, thank you for pancakes and cartoons and Mommy being home. She paused, then added softly, and thank you for giving Mommy a friend. Tears welled in Mariah's eyes as she tucked the blanket around her daughter. Grace was right. Somewhere between professional duty and providence, she had found a friend in the most unexpected place. More than that, she had found hope. Good night, sweet girl, Mariah whispered, kissing Grace's forehead. Good night, Mommy. Grace's eyes were already drooping. Love you to the moon and back. Love you to the moon and back. Love you to the stars and beyond. Mariah left the door cracked open, just the way Grace liked it, and stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the tears fall freely now. They weren't sad tears, not really. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of daring to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were finally changing for the better. The sun was setting as Mariah climbed the worn stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment, her footsteps heavy after another long day at the hospital. Her muscles ached, but a small smile played on her lips. For the first time in years, hope flickered in her heart. Ethan's offer of flexible work meant she could finally quit her exhausting night cleaning job. The moment she reached her floor, something white caught her eye. A paper was taped to her door, fluttering slightly in the hallway draft. Her heart dropped as she got closer and recognized the official letterhead. With trembling fingers, Mariah pulled the notice from the door. The words blurred before her eyes as she read, "Notice to vacate." The rest of the message hit her like physical blows. Building sold, 30 days, must vacate premises. No, 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 she whispered, fumbling with her keys. Inside, Grace looked up from her homework at the kitchen table, her face brightening. Mommy, I finished my math problems early. Grace's smile faded as she saw her mother's face. What's wrong? Mariah quickly folded the notice and forced a smile. That's wonderful, sweetie. Let me see those math problems. She sat beside Grace, trying to focus on the neat rows of numbers while her mind raced. 30 days. Where would they go? Every spare penny had gone to keeping this roof over their heads. The next morning at the hospital, Mariah went through her rounds mechanically. Her thoughts kept drifting to apartment listings she'd scrolled through at dawn, all well beyond her means, even with her new arrangement with Ethan. As she approached the nurse's station to update some charts, voices drifted from around the corner. She recognized Sarah and Jenny, 2 nurses from the cardiac unit. Got herself assigned to the CEO's case, Sarah was saying in a low voice. Pretty convenient, don't you think? I heard he's offering her some cushy private nursing gig, Jenny replied. Must be nice to have a billionaire wrapped around your finger. More like she wrapped herself around him, Sarah snickered. Single mom, 3 jobs. She knew exactly what she was doing. Hot shame flooded Mariah's cheeks. The charts in her hands trembled slightly. She'd known there would be talk, but hearing it still felt like a knife to the gut. Poor guy probably doesn't even realize he's being played, Jenny added. These rich men, they're suckers for a sob story. Mariah backed away quietly, her throat tight. She ducked into the supply closet, pressing her forehead against the cool metal shelving. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She couldn't break down. Not here. Not now. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She avoided the break room, eating her lunch alone in the courtyard. Every time someone glanced her way, she wondered if they too thought she was manipulating Ethan for his money. The thought made her stomach churn. When she checked Ethan's vitals that afternoon, she could barely meet his eyes. He seemed to notice something was wrong, but she deflected his questions with professional courtesy. How could she explain that his kindness, meant to help her, was now tarnishing her reputation? That evening, after tucking Grace into bed with an extra long hug, Mariah sat cross-legged on her own bed. The eviction notice lay in front of her, its official letterhead gleaming in the dim light of her bedside lamp. She picked it up for what felt like the 100th time, as if the words might somehow change. Her small bedroom felt even smaller tonight. The walls that had sheltered them for 5 years now seemed to be closing in. This apartment wasn't much, but it was home. It was where Grace had learned to read, where they'd shared countless meals and stories, where they'd held each other through the dark days after Tom's death. Mariah smoothed out a wrinkle in the paper with trembling fingers. "Lord," she whispered into the quiet darkness, "I know you haven't brought us this far to leave us now." Her voice caught. "But I'm scared. I don't know what to do." The ticking of the bedside clock seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear Grace's soft breathing. Her daughter's unwavering faith came to mind. How just that morning she'd declared that God always had a plan, even when they couldn't see it. "Please," Mariah continued, her whispered prayers mixing with the quiet sounds of their home. "Give me strength. Show me the way forward." She clutched the notice tighter, her knuckles white in the dim light. "Not for me, Lord, but for her, for Grace." The paper crinkled in her grip as memories of the nurse's whispered accusations echoed in her mind. Everything she'd done, every extra shift, every missed hour of sleep, had been for Grace. How dare they suggest she was trying to seduce her way to an easier life? But doubt crept in like a shadow. Was accepting Ethan's help a mistake? Should she turn down his job offer to protect her reputation? The thought of going back to 3 jobs made her body ache with exhaustion. But at least then no one could accuse her of ulterior motives. Mariah lay back against her pillow, still holding the notice. The ceiling above her held no answers, but she kept staring at it anyway. 30 days. The number echoed in her mind like a ticking clock. 30 days to find a new home they couldn't afford. 30 days before they had to leave, the only stability Grace had known since losing her father. Her prayers continued, whispered into the darkness, until exhaustion finally began to pull at her consciousness. But sleep remained elusive, as her mind churned with worries about tomorrow, about the next 30 days, about all the days that would follow. The eviction notice was still clutched in her hand, a tangible reminder of how quickly security could crumble. Tomorrow, she would have to be strong again. Tomorrow, she would wear her calm mask for Grace, make breakfast, check apartment listings, and face the whispers at work. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of her room, Mariah Johnson allowed herself to feel the full weight of her fear as she prayed for the strength to carry on. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow across Ethan's private room. He sat propped up against his pillows, watching Mariah check his vitals with practiced efficiency. But something was different today. Dark circles shadowed her usually bright eyes, and her shoulders slumped slightly as she worked. "Your blood pressure is looking good today, Mr. Callahan," Mariah said, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. She scribbled numbers onto his chart, but Ethan noticed her hand trembling slightly. "Mariah," he said softly, dropping his usual formal tone. "What's wrong?" She looked up, startled by the gentleness in his voice. "Nothing's wrong. I'm just a little tired." "I've seen you tired before. This is different." Ethan's blue eyes held genuine concern. "Please, tell me what's troubling you." Mariah busied herself adjusting his IV line, avoiding his gaze. "It's nothing you need to worry about. I'm handling it." "Mom!" Grace's cheerful voice rang out as she bounded into the room, her backpack bouncing. "Hi, Mr. Sunshine." Ethan's face softened at the sight of the little girl. "There's my favorite junior nurse." Grace climbed onto the chair beside his bed, pulling out her own toy stethoscope. "Can I check your heart today?" "Grace." "Honey," Mariah started. But Ethan waved her concern away. "I insist on a thorough examination from Nurse Grace," he said with mock seriousness, making the little girl giggle. As Grace pressed her plastic stethoscope to Ethan's chest, Her face scrunched in concentration. Mariah's brave facade cracked slightly. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could catch it. "Mommy?" Grace noticed immediately. "Why are you crying?" Ethan reached out, touching Mariah's arm gently. "Please, let me help. Whatever it, Island." Mariah sank into the chair opposite Grace, her exhaustion finally showing through. "We're being evicted," she whispered. "The landlord's selling our building. We have to be out in 30 days, and her voice caught. "I don't know where we'll go." Grace's small face fell. "We have to leave our home?" "Oh, sweetie." Mariah pulled her daughter close. "We'll figure something out. We always do." Ethan watched them, his heart heavy. "Have you started looking for new places?" "Every spare moment," Mariah said. "But everything in safe neighborhoods is so expensive, and with the deposit requirements." She trailed off, embarrassed to discuss money problems with a billionaire. "I know some real estate agents," Ethan said carefully, not wanting to overwhelm her with help. "Let me make a few calls, just to see what's available." "Mr. Callahan, I couldn't—" "Please," he interrupted. "Call me Ethan, and it's just a few phone calls, nothing more." Grace bounced in her seat. "Can we look for a house with a garden? For my flowers?" Despite her worry, Mariah smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. "We'll see what we can find, baby." Throughout the morning, as Mariah tended to her nursing duties, Grace stayed by Ethan's side, helping with his recovery. She told him stories about her school friends, hummed little tunes, and drew pictures of houses with crayon gardens. During a quiet moment when Grace was absorbed in her coloring, Ethan made several discreet calls. Mariah pretended not to notice, but her heart warmed at his genuine desire to help. "Mr. Sunshine?" Grace asked later, climbing onto his bed with careful movements she'd learned from watching her mother. "Will you come visit us when we find a new home?" Ethan's throat tightened unexpectedly. "I'd like that very much." "Grace!" Mariah called from the doorway. "Time for us to go, honey. Mrs. Martinez is waiting to take you to dance class." "But I want to stay with Mr. Sunshine," Grace protested. Now, Ethan said, tapping her nose gently. "Every good nurse knows when it's time for a shift change. Besides, I need you to practice your dancing. Maybe you can show me some new moves tomorrow?" Grace's face lit up. "Promise you'll watch?" "Promise." Mariah helped Grace gather her things, the little girl's energy filling the room with life and laughter. As they prepared to leave, Mariah turned to Ethan. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "I have a few leads already," he replied. "We'll talk more tomorrow?" She nodded, grateful tears threatening again. "Tomorrow." Ethan watched as Mariah took Grace's hand, the two of them walking out together. Grace skipped, telling her mother about all the medical procedures she'd performed that day. Their voices faded down the hallway, leaving his room feeling strangely empty. He leaned back against his pillows, realizing how quickly he'd grown accustomed to their presence. The silence that had once been his constant companion now felt hollow. His thoughts drifted to Grace's innocent laughter, to Mariah's gentle strength. For the first time since his wife's passing, the loneliness that had become his shadow felt a little lighter. Reaching for his phone, he began making more calls. Somewhere in this city was a perfect home for Mariah and Grace, and somehow, helping them find it felt more important than any business deal he'd ever closed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ethan's hospital room as Mariah methodically checked his vital signs. The steady beep of monitors created a peaceful rhythm, broken only by the soft scratch of her pen against his chart. Today, something felt different in the air between them, a gentle understanding that had grown over the past few days. "Your heart rate's strong today," Mariah noted, removing the blood pressure cuff. "The physical therapy must be helping." Ethan nodded, rubbing his arm where the cuff had been. "I haven't felt this good in years, actually. Not since." He trailed off, his eyes distant. Mariah paused in her charting, recognizing the look of someone lost in memories. She'd seen it in her own mirror too many times. "Since your wife?" she asked softly. Ethan's eyes snapped to hers, surprised by her perception. After a moment, he nodded. "Sarah. She passed 3 years ago. Cancer." "I'm so sorry," Mariah said, settling into the chair beside his bed. Her clipboard lay forgotten in her lap. "What about Grace's father?" Ethan asked carefully. "If you don't mind me asking." Mariah's fingers unconsciously twisted her wedding ring, which she still wore. "Tom was a firefighter. She took a deep breath. "There was a warehouse fire 2 years ago. He went back in for a trapped worker. and the roof collapsed. "Mommy?" Grace's voice came from the doorway. She stood there clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, having returned from her afternoon snack in the children's waiting area. "Come here, sweetie." Mariah opened her arms, and Grace climbed into her lap. "Are you telling Mr. Sunshine about Daddy?" Grace asked, her small fingers playing with her mother's badge. "Yes, baby. Is that okay?" Grace nodded solemnly. "Daddy was a hero. He saved people." She looked at Ethan. "Mommy cries sometimes, but smiles anyway. She says it's okay to be sad and happy at the same time." Mariah hugged Grace closer, pressing a kiss to her dark curls. "That's right. Sarah used to say something similar," Ethan said quietly. "She was always wise like that." He shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. "After she died, I couldn't handle it. The emptiness of our house. The silence. So I buried myself in work. Longer hours, bigger deals, more offices around the world. Anything to keep moving, to avoid thinking." "I understand that," Mariah said. "After Tom, I took on more shifts, extra jobs, partly because we needed the money, but also because being busy meant less time to remember." "But you had Grace," Ethan observed. "You couldn't completely hide from it." Mariah smiled sadly. "No, and thank God for that. Grace kept me anchored. Didn't you, baby?" "I helped Mommy remember the happy times," Grace declared proudly. "Like when Daddy made pancakes shaped like animals, even though they looked silly." A chuckle escaped Ethan. Sarah was a terrible cook too. She once set off the fire alarm making toast. "Tom burned water," Mariah laughed. "Actually boiled a pot dry while trying to make pasta." "How is that even possible?" Ethan asked, grinning. "He got distracted reading me a story," Grace giggled. "Mommy had to open all the windows 'cause of the smoke." Their laughter filled the room, bright and healing. It felt good, Mariah realized, to share these memories, to remember the joy, along with the pain. "Sarah and I never had children," Ethan said after a moment, his voice soft with regret. "We always said we'd start trying after one more big project, one more expansion. We thought we had time." Grace climbed down from her mother's lap and approached Ethan's bed. With the direct sincerity only children possess, she placed her stuffed rabbit next to him. "Mr. Hoppy helps me when I'm sad. You can borrow him." Ethan's throat tightened as he looked at the well-loved toy. "Thank you, Grace. That's very kind." "You know what else helps?" Grace continued. "Singing. Mommy and I sing Daddy's favorite songs sometimes. Do you want to hear one?" Before either adult could respond, Grace launched into a slightly off-key rendition of "You Are My Sunshine." Mariah joined in softly, harmonizing with her daughter's enthusiastic performance. Ethan watched them, struck by how naturally they shared their grief and joy together. Grace swayed as she sang, her face bright with innocent happiness, while Mariah's eyes shone with both tears and laughter. When the song ended, Grace bowed dramatically, making both adults applaud. "That was beautiful," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Sarah loved music too. She played piano." "Really?" Grace's eyes widened. "I want to learn piano." "But Mommy says," "Grace," Mariah interrupted gently. "Let's not bother Mr. Callahan with that right now." "It's fine," Ethan assured her. "I'd love to hear about your musical aspirations, Grace." As Grace launched into an elaborate description of her future as a piano-playing Dr. Princess, Mariah noticed Ethan's eyes growing heavy. "I think it's time we let Mr. Callahan rest, honey. He's had his physical therapy today, remember?" "Okay," Grace sighed. She carefully tucked Mr. Hoppy closer to Ethan. "You can keep him until tomorrow." "That's very generous of you," Ethan said seriously. "I'll take good care of him." As Mariah gathered their things, Grace gave Ethan a gentle hug, mindful of his surgical sight, just as her mother had taught her. "Sweet dreams, Mr. Sunshine." Mariah helped Grace down from the bed, then checked Ethan's the fourth one last time. "Get some rest. We'll see you in the morning." Ethan watched as they headed for the door, Grace skipping ahead while chattering about what songs they should sing tomorrow. Just before they left, he caught a glimpse of Grace turning to wave, her smile radiating pure joy despite all she'd been through. "Such resilience," he whispered to himself, fingers absently stroking the worn fur of Mr. Hoppy. "I envy that." The morning sun painted golden streaks across the city streets as Ethan's sleek black car pulled up to a quiet apartment building. Mariah sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't asked where they were going when Ethan insisted on showing her something important after his morning checkup. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice warm but careful. The building stood tall and welcoming, with neat flower boxes decorating each window. It wasn't fancy, but it was well maintained. The kind of place where families made homes. "What is this?" Mariah asked, though something in her heart already knew. Grace bounced excitedly in the back seat. "It's pretty, Mommy! Look at all the flowers!" Ethan helped them out of the car, leading them through a spotless lobby to an elevator. They rode to the third floor in silence, Mariah's heart pounding with each passing second. When they reached apartment 3B, Ethan pulled out a key. "Before you say anything," he said, holding up a hand, "just look." The door swung open to reveal a sunlit living room, already furnished with comfortable-looking chairs and a plush sofa in warm earth tones. Mariah's hand flew to her mouth as she took in the sight. Curtains dancing in the breeze from open windows, a small dining table with 4 chairs, and a kitchen that gleamed with new appliances. "Mr. Sunshine," Grace squealed, darting past them. "Look at all this space." Her footsteps echoed through the apartment as she explored, her excitement filling every corner. Mariah stood frozen in the doorway. "Ethan, I can't, this is too much. I couldn't possibly." "You can. And it's not," Ethan said firmly. "This isn't charity, Mariah. This is me repaying kindness with kindness." "But, Mommy," Grace's voice carried from down the hallway, "there are 2 bedrooms, and mine has pink walls." Despite her protests, Mariah couldn't help but follow her daughter's voice. The smaller bedroom was indeed painted a soft pink, with a white desk and dresser. A twin bed sat against one wall, topped with a colorful quilt that looked handmade. "Did you do all this?" Mariah whispered, turning to Ethan, who stood in the doorway. He nodded. "I had some help. The building manager's wife is quite good at decorating." Grace twirled in the middle of the room. "It's perfect. Can we stay here forever, Mommy, please?" Mariah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Honey, it's not that simple. We can't just—" "The rent is less than what you're paying now," Ethan interrupted gently. "The building has security, and there's a park just a block away. The school bus stops right out front." Mariah walked slowly back to the living room, taking in every detail. The furniture wasn't expensive, but it was new and carefully chosen. Someone had even placed fresh flowers in a vase on the coffee table. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, wiping at her eyes. "Say yes," Ethan said simply. "Let someone help you for once, Mariah. You've spent so long carrying everything on your own shoulders." Grace appeared between them, taking both their hands in hers. "Please, Mommy. Mr. Sunshine made it so nice for us." Looking down at her daughter's hopeful face, Mariah felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe it was pride giving way to grace, or fear yielding to trust. "Okay," she whispered, then louder. "Okay, yes." Grace jumped up and down, her joy infectious. "Can we move in today? Right now?" Ethan chuckled. "Everything's ready whenever you are. The lease is drawn up, just waiting for your signature." Mariah walked to the kitchen, running her hand along the smooth countertop. "I can't believe this is real," she said softly. "Believe it," Ethan replied, following her. "You deserve this. Both of you do." They spent the next hour exploring every corner of the apartment. Grace discovered built-in bookshelves in her room and a window seat perfect for reading. The master bedroom had a small ensuite bathroom that made Mariah's eyes water again. No more sharing a single bathroom with temperamental plumbing. As the afternoon light began to fade, Ethan insisted on having their first meal delivered to the apartment. He ordered from a nearby Italian restaurant, and soon the new home was filled with the aroma of garlic bread and pasta. Mariah and Grace sat at their new dining table, boxes of takeout spread before them. Grace had already claimed her chair, declaring it had the best view of both the TV and the kitchen. "This is the best dinner ever," Grace announced, twirling spaghetti around her fork. "It feels like home already." Mariah looked around the room, at the soft lamplight and the shadows dancing on freshly painted walls. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. Here, in this space that seemed to wrap around them like a warm embrace, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: safety. "You're right, sweetheart," she said, reaching across to squeeze her daughter's hand. "It does feel like home, They ate and laughed, sharing stories and dreams for their new space. Grace planned where all her toys would go, while Mariah marveled at the thought of cooking in a kitchen where all the burners were. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of their new apartment, casting warm patches of light across the hardwood floors. Mariah was still getting used to calling this place home. The thought made her heart skip with both gratitude and unease. She watched as Grace sat cross-legged in the living room, surrounded by her well-loved stuffed animals, humming a gentle melody while making them dance. Ethan stood in the doorway, his usual stern expression softening as he observed the scene. The little girl's voice carried through the room, pure and sweet, filling the space with an innocent joy that seemed to chase away the shadows of his normally serious demeanor. "She's always had a gift for music," Mariah said softly, moving to stand beside him. "Even as a baby, she would hum herself to sleep." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving Grace. "I noticed. She has perfect pitch. Did you know that? The tune she's humming now is exactly the same one she was singing yesterday." Mariah blinked in surprise. "I didn't realize you were paying attention." "I pay attention to everything," he replied, then checked his watch. "Would you mind if I stepped out for about an hour? There's something I need to take care of." When he returned, 2 delivery men followed him, carrying a large box. Grace's eyes grew wide as they began to unpack a beautiful electronic piano keyboard, complete with a stand and a small bench. "Mr. Sunshine," Grace squealed, bouncing on her toes. "Is that really for me?" Ethan's face broke into one of his rare smiles. "Well, I couldn't help but notice how much you love music. Every young musician needs an instrument to practice on." Mariah's hand flew to her mouth. "Ethan, this is too much. We can't possibly." "Please." He held up his hand, his voice gentle but firm. "Let me do this. Music education is important, and Grace has a natural talent that should be nurtured." The delivery men finished setting up the keyboard, and Grace approached it with reverence, her small fingers hovering over the keys. She pressed one experimentally, and a clear note rang out. Her face lit up with pure joy. "Mommy, look!" she exclaimed. "It sounds just like a real piano." She sat on the bench, her feet barely reaching the pedals, and began pressing keys in sequence, finding a simple melody. Mariah watched, tears welling in her eyes. This was the kind of childhood she'd always dreamed of giving Grace. One filled with opportunities and beautiful moments. But between hospital bills, rent, and basic necessities, extras like music lessons had seemed impossible. Grace's fingers moved more confidently now, picking out a tune she must have learned at school. "Mr. Sunshine," she called out, "I want to play you a thank you song." Ethan moved closer, standing beside the keyboard. "I'd be honored." Grace's face scrunched in concentration as she began to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It wasn't perfect. Her timing was a bit off, and she missed a few notes, but the sincerity in her performance made it beautiful. When she finished, she looked up at Ethan with shining eyes. "That was wonderful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Grace." "Can I learn more songs?" Grace asked eagerly. "I want to play all the music in the whole world." Mariah laughed softly, wiping away a tear. "We'll look into lessons, sweetheart. But first, you need to say a proper thank you to Mr. Callahan." Grace jumped up from the bench and threw her arms around Ethan's waist, catching him off guard. After a moment's hesitation, he patted her back awkwardly, but his eyes were warm. "Thank you, Mr. Sunshine," she said into his suit jacket. "This is the best present ever." For the next hour, Grace experimented with the keyboard, discovering different sounds and rhythms. Mariah and Ethan sat on the couch, watching her explore her new instrument. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, but Grace seemed determined to keep playing until she could barely keep her eyes open. "Sweetheart," Mariah finally said, "it's getting late. Time for bed." "Just 5 more minutes?" Grace pleaded, but a big yawn gave her away. "The piano will still be here tomorrow," Mariah promised, leading her daughter away from the keyboard. Grace's steps were already heavy with sleepiness as they walked to her bedroom. She crawled into bed, still humming softly. Mariah tucked the blankets around her, smoothing back her daughter's hair. "Mommy?" Grace's voice was drowsy but content. "Yes, baby. See? God still writes happy stories." With those words, Grace's eyes fluttered closed, a peaceful smile on her face. Mariah sat there for a moment, watching her daughter drift off to sleep, those simple words echoing in her heart. Through all their struggles and hardships, Grace's faith had never wavered. Maybe it was time for Mariah to believe in happy stories too. The morning sun filtered through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the sterile corridors. Mariah adjusted her crisp, white uniform and tried to steady her breathing as she made her rounds. The familiar squeak of her comfortable nursing shoes against the polished floor usually brought comfort, but today it felt like every step drew unwanted attention. "Did you hear?" A hushed voice drifted from the nurse's station. "That single mom in Ward C? Living in some fancy new place now?" Mariah's cheeks burned as she pretended not to hear, focusing instead on checking the medication cart. Her hands trembled slightly as she sorted through the morning doses. "I mean, what kind of nurse gets a whole apartment from a patient?" Another voice chimed in, not bothering to lower their volume. "Seems pretty clear what's going on there." Sarah, a nurse Mariah had considered a friend, glanced her way and quickly looked down. The betrayal stung worse than the gossip itself. During her lunch break, Mariah sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, picking at her sandwich without appetite. Her phone buzzed, a text from Grace's teacher requesting a meeting after school. Her stomach knotted with worry. Later that afternoon, Miss Peterson sat primly behind her desk, hands folded. "Mrs. Johnson, I needed to discuss something Grace shared during show and tell today." Mariah shifted uncomfortably in the small plastic chair. "Is everything okay?" Grace told her classmates that Mr. Sunshine bought us a house. She seemed quite excited about it. Miss Peterson's tone carried an edge of judgment. "As her teacher, I feel obligated to express some concern about the message this sends to other children, and to be frank, about the appropriateness of such an arrangement." Heat crept up Mariah's neck. "It's not what you think. Mr. Callahan is a patient who—" "I understand your personal life is your business," Miss Peterson cut in, "but when it affects the classroom environment—" Mariah's eyes stung. "Grace is just excited about having a stable home. There's nothing inappropriate about it." Back at the hospital for her evening shift, the whispers seemed to follow her everywhere. Even patients gave her strange looks, as though they'd somehow heard the rumors too. In the medication room, Nurse Karen deliberately stepped away when Mariah entered. "Wouldn't want anyone thinking I'm involved in anything questionable," she muttered loud enough for Mariah to hear. Mariah's hand shook as she prepared her patient's evening medications. 7 years of dedicated service, countless nights staying late to comfort dying patients, all the extra shifts she'd covered, none of it seemed to matter now. During her rounds, she overheard 2 orderlies talking around the corner. "Rich guy probably thinks he's doing charity work," one snickered. "But who accepts a whole apartment from a patient? There are rules against that stuff." "Maybe she's planning to sue him later," the other suggested. "These single moms, they know how to work the system." Mariah ducked into the supply closet, pressing her palms against her eyes to hold back tears. She thought of Grace, innocent and happy, playing her new piano without any idea of the storm brewing around them. The joy in her daughter's eyes when she practiced her simple tunes. Was that worth all this? Her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, caught her arm as she left the supply closet. "Mariah, we need to talk." The walk to the administrative office felt like a march to execution. Each step echoed in the empty hallway. Mrs. Chen's usually friendly face was masked with professional detachment as she closed the door behind them. "Please, sit down." Mrs. Chen settled behind her desk, pulling out a manila folder. "Several staff members have raised concerns about your relationship with Mr. Callahan." "Mrs. Chen, I can explain. The hospital takes these matters very seriously, Mariah." She slid an official-looking document across the desk. "We're launching a formal review into your conduct. You'll need to provide documentation of all interactions with Mr. Callahan, including any gifts or financial arrangements." Mariah's vision blurred as she stared at the paper. The words "professional ethics investigation" swam before her eyes. "Your nursing license could be at risk, Mrs." Chen continued, her voice softer now. "I've always known you as an excellent nurse, Mariah. But accepting housing from a patient crosses a line." "I never asked for anything," Mariah whispered. "He offered because I'm sorry. But I'll need you to save your explanation for the review board." Mrs. Chen stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "You'll receive formal notice of the hearing date." Mariah's legs felt like lead as she stood. The folder in her hands might as well have been filled with stones. As she reached the door, Mrs. Chen added, "And Mariah, you might want to consider legal representation." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Mariah stumbled down the hall, her world tilting sideways. Everything she'd worked for, her career, her reputation, her ability to provide for Grace, was crumbling around her. She barely made it to the staff locker room before her knees gave out. Sliding down against the cold metal lockers, she clutched the folder to her chest and let out a silent sob. The paper crumpled in her grip as her shoulders shook with the weight of it all. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Grace. "Can't wait to show you my new song. Love you, Mommy." The simple message only made the tears fall faster. How could something as pure as helping her daughter have turned into such a nightmare? Through the fog of her despair, she heard the locker room door open. Quickly, wiping her eyes, she struggled to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The official notice slipped from her hands and fluttered to the floor, a white flag of surrender in the battle she never meant to fight. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Ethan's hospital room as he scrolled through his phone, frowning at an email from the hospital administration. His jaw tightened as he read about the investigation into Mariah's conduct. The words "professional misconduct" and "ethical concerns" jumped off the screen, making his stomach churn. Down the hall, the familiar click of Mariah's shoes approached his room. Ethan quickly locked his phone, his face settling into a mask of careful neutrality. When she entered, her usual warm smile seemed strained, the corners of her eyes tight with worry. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Callahan?" she asked, maintaining professional courtesy despite their friendship. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mariah, we need to talk." She paused in the middle of checking his IV, her hand frozen mid-motion. "What's wrong?" "I've heard about the investigation." His voice was flat, controlled. I think it's best if we keep our distance for a while." The color drained from Mariah's face. "What?" "Until this blows over," he continued, his words measured and careful. "No more private nursing arrangement, no more visits. It's for the best." Mariah's hands trembled as she set down his chart. "Ethan, please, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," he cut her off, his voice gentler now but still firm. "This is about protecting your career, your reputation. By pushing us away," her voice cracked slightly. "After everything?" Ethan turned his face toward the window, unable to meet her eyes. "It's temporary, just until the investigation concludes." The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. Mariah stood there, her shoulders straight but her hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white with tension. "Grace will be heartbroken," she whispered. The mention of Grace made Ethan's jaw clench. He thought of the little girl's bright smile, her innocent chatter, the way she called him Mr. Sunshine. But he forced himself to remain resolute. "She'll understand someday," he said, though the words felt hollow even to him. Mariah nodded slowly, professionally, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Of course, Mr. Callahan. I'll have another nurse assigned to you immediately." She turned and walked out, her steps perfectly measured until she was in the hallway. Through the partially open door, Ethan could hear her quick, uneven breaths as she hurried away. That evening, in their new apartment, Grace sat at her keyboard, her small fingers hovering over the keys but not playing. She hadn't touched it since coming home from school, sensing something was wrong the moment she saw her mother's face. "Mommy?" Grace's voice was small. "When is Mr. Sunshine coming to hear my new song?" Mariah sat beside her daughter, pulling her close. "Sweetheart, Mr. Callahan, he needs some time alone right now, to get better." Grace's lower lip trembled. "But he was getting better with us." He smiled more. "You said so." "I know, baby." Mariah stroked her daughter's hair, fighting to keep her own voice steady. "Is it because of what Tommy said at school? About us using Mr. Sunshine for money?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I told him that wasn't true. Mr. Sunshine is our friend." Mariah's heart clenched. "Oh, Gracie." "Please, Mommy," Grace sobbed, throwing her arms around her mother's neck. "Don't let go of Mr. Sunshine. He makes everything brighter, like Daddy did." Mariah held her daughter as she cried, rocking her gently. Grace's tears soaked into her shirt, each sob like a physical blow to her heart. After a while, Grace's crying subsided into hiccups, and she fell into an exhausted sleep in her mother's arms. Later that night, after tucking Grace into bed, Mariah moved silently through their apartment, the moonlight streaming through the windows, made the furniture cast long shadows on the walls. She pulled out their old suitcases from the closet, the ones they'd used when they first moved to the city after her husband died. Her hands shook as she began folding clothes into neat piles. She worked mechanically, trying not to think about the piano keyboard that would have to stay behind, or the way Grace had painted her name in sparkly letters on her bedroom door. Each item she packed felt heavier than the last. In Grace's room, she carefully selected her daughter's favorite stuffed animals and most worn clothes. The rest they would leave behind. A small price to pay for a fresh start somewhere else, somewhere without whispers and accusations, somewhere where Grace wouldn't have to defend her mother on the playground. Mariah paused at Grace's desk, picking up a crayon drawing. It showed 3 figures holding hands. A tall man in a suit labeled Mr. Sunshine, a woman in nurse's scrubs, and a small girl with a big smile. Above them, Grace had written in wobbly letters, "My family." A tear splashed onto the paper, and Mariah quickly set it down, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She couldn't break down, not now. She had to be strong, just as she'd been when John died, just as she'd been every day since. In the kitchen, she found a notepad and began making lists. Cities with nursing shortages, affordable apartments, schools for Grace. The practical details helped steady her hands, gave her something to focus on besides the ache in her chest. The clock on the wall ticked steadily as she worked, marking time in the quiet apartment. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime energy, oblivious to the small family's pain. Mariah moved from room to room, gathering their life into boxes and bags, preparing to disappear from the life they'd begun to build. When she finally stopped, exhausted, she found herself standing in front of the window. The city lights twinkled below, including those of the hospital where Ethan lay, where her career was unraveling, where everything had changed. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes. "I'm sorry, Grace," she whispered into the darkness. "Sometimes even sunshine can't last forever." The evening sun cast long shadows through the half-empty apartment as Mariah sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by moving boxes and scattered papers. Her laptop balanced precariously on a box labeled Kitchen, while she typed another cover letter for a small hospital in Vermont. The cursor blinked steadily, almost mockingly, as she tried to find the right words to explain why she wanted to relocate. How could she put into words that she was running away, that her reputation was in tatters, that she'd lost not just her job security, but also someone she'd grown to care about deeply? "Mommy?" Grace's small voice came from behind her. "Can I help pack my books?" Mariah turned to see her daughter clutching her favorite stuffed bear, Mr. Whiskers. Grace's eyes were red-rimmed, and she hadn't smiled properly in days. It broke Mariah's heart to see her usually bouncy 7-year-old so subdued. "Of course, sweetie." Mariah patted the carpet beside her. "Come sit with me for a minute first." Grace shuffled over and curled up against her mother's side. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the vanilla cookies they'd stress-baked yesterday. "I don't want to move," she whispered. "What if Mr. Sunshine comes looking for us, and we're not here?" Mariah's throat tightened. She wrapped an arm around Grace's small shoulders, pulling her closer. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to protect the people they love." "But Mr. Sunshine protected us." Grace's voice rose with emotion. "He gave us this apartment and my piano." "He made you laugh again." She looked up at her mother with tear-filled eyes. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why he stopped coming?" "No, baby, no." Mariah pulled Grace onto her lap, even though she was getting almost too big for it. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mr. Callahan. He has his own life, his own problems to deal with. Sometimes, people come into our lives for just a little while, like shooting stars." "But I don't want him to be a shooting star," Grace sniffled. "I want him to be our Sunday." Mariah closed her eyes against her own tears, rocking Grace gently. The truth was, she'd started to want that too. She'd begun to imagine a future where Ethan's smile greeted them at breakfast, where his strong hands helped Grace practice piano, where his quiet strength supported them through good times and bad. What a fool she'd been. She glanced around their half-packed apartment. The piano keyboard sat silent in the corner, gathering dust. Grace hadn't touched it since Ethan stopped visiting. The walls were bare where family photos had hung, now carefully wrapped and boxed. Everything felt temporary, unreal, like they were living in the ghost of their former happiness. "Would you at least tell him goodbye?" Grace asked, her voice muffled against Mariah's shoulder. The question pierced Mariah's heart. I don't think that would be a good idea, sweetheart. He made it clear he needs space. But you always tell me to say proper goodbyes, Grace insisted. Like when we visit Daddy at the cemetery. Mariah's hands trembled as she smoothed Grace's hair. This is different. Mr. Callahan isn't. He's not. She couldn't finish the sentence. What was Ethan to them, really? A patient who became a friend? A benefactor? A dream of something more that had shattered before it could fully form? Standing up, Mariah gently set Grace on her feet. How about we take a break from packing? We could order pizza and watch your favorite movie? But Grace shook her head, pulling away. I'm not hungry. She walked to her room, then paused in the doorway. Mommy, do you think God makes mistakes sometimes? No, sweetie. Why do you ask? Because I prayed so hard for Mr. Sunshine to be part of our family. I thought God sent him to us. But now, Grace's lower lip trembled. Now it feels like a mistake. Before Mariah could respond, Grace disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. The quiet click felt like a gunshot in the silent apartment. Mariah sank back down among the boxes, letting the tears fall freely now. She'd thought she was protecting Grace by accepting Ethan's help, by letting him into their lives. Instead, she'd only given her daughter one more loss to cope with, one more person to miss. Across town, in his penthouse office, Ethan Callahan sat at his desk, staring at a child's drawing. Grace had left it in his hospital room weeks ago. 3 stick figures holding hands, standing under a bright yellow sundae. She'd labeled them carefully, Mommy, me, and Mr. Sunshine. His fingers traced the crayon lines gently. The drawing was wrinkled now from being carried in his jacket pocket, but the joy in those simple lines remained unchanged. Grace had captured something he'd forgotten existed, the simple happiness of belonging. He'd convinced himself that pulling away was the right thing to do, that the investigation into Mariah's conduct would go easier if he wasn't in the picture, that she and Grace would be better off without the complications his presence brought. But now, looking at the drawing, he wondered if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. The stick figures smiled up at him with wide crayon grins, mocking his attempts at noble sacrifice. Grace had drawn hearts floating around them, and at the bottom, in her wobbly handwriting, she'd written, My family. Family. The word he'd been running from since losing Sarah. The very thing he'd buried himself in work to avoid thinking about. Until a little girl with unshakable faith and her strong, compassionate mother had shown him what he was missing. Ethan picked up his phone, then set it down again. What right did he have to reach out now, after pulling away when they needed him most? After letting rumors and fear drive him to abandon the 2 people who had brought light back into his life? He smoothed the drawing carefully, remembering Grace's delighted giggles when she'd presented it to him, remembering Mariah's proud smile as she watched their interaction, remembering how, for a brief time, he'd felt like he was part of something real, something precious. Now that too was packed away in boxes, ready to disappear to some small town where he'd never see them again. The drawing stared back at him, its simple truth undeniable, and slowly, surely, his carefully constructed walls of self-protection began to crumble. Ethan Callahan stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over the skyline. The empty space around him felt colder than usual, haunted by memories of laughter that had briefly filled these rooms. Grace's innocent giggles, Mariah's gentle voice, now gone. His fingers traced the child's drawing he held, 3 stick figures holding hands, with My family scrawled across the top in wobbly letters. Grace had left it behind in his hospital room, a reminder of what he was losing through his own foolish pride. Wealth means nothing without love to share it with. His late wife Catherine's words echoed in his mind, as clear as the day she'd spoken them. It had been their last conversation before the accident that took her life. He'd been too busy with a merger to drive her to her charity event that rainy night. The guilt had driven him deeper into his work, building walls around his heart with each passing year, until Mariah and Grace had walked into his life. Ethan's chest tightened as he remembered Grace's first visit to his hospital room, how she'd melted his carefully constructed defenses with nothing more than a crayon and a smile. And Mariah, her quiet strength, her dedication to her daughter, her ability to see past his gruff exterior to the lonely man beneath. What am I doing? He whispered to the empty room. He'd pushed them away, thinking he was protecting Mariah from the hospital gossip. Instead, he'd abandoned her when she needed support the most, just like he'd abandoned Catherine that night, choosing work over love. Moving to his desk, Ethan pressed the intercom button. "Janet, get me Richard Morton on the line. Immediately." His attorney answered on the first ring. "Ethan, it's nearly 8 o'clock. I need you to prepare several documents." Ethan's voice held the sharp focus that had built his empire. "First, I want the deed to the Riverside Apartments transferred to Mariah Johnson's name. Full ownership." "The entire building?" Richard sounded startled. "Ethan, that's a multi-million-dollar property." "Second," Ethan continued, "draft paperwork for a new charitable foundation, the Single Parent Nurse Scholarship Fund. I'm seeding it with $50 million. Papers rustled on Richard's end. "This island, unusual for you. May I ask what prompted this?" Ethan's eyes drifted to Grace's drawing. "Let's just say I'm finally following my late wife's advice about what matters most in life. I'll need a few hours to prepare everything properly. You have until morning. I want all documents ready before the hospital board meeting at 9. Ethan's tone left no room for argument. "And Richard, I need you to dig up everything you can about these accusations against Mariah Johnson. Every source, every whisper. I want to know who started them and why." After ending the call, Ethan walked to his bedroom closet. Behind his suits hung a small box he hadn't opened in years. Inside lay Catherine's favorite necklace, a simple silver chain with a heart-shaped pendant. She'd always said it reminded her that love was life's greatest treasure. He carefully lifted the necklace, remembering how she'd worn it every day. "You were right, my love," he whispered. "I've been chasing the wrong kind of wealth all these years." Back in his office, Ethan worked through the night. He reviewed hospital policies, prepared statements, and gathered evidence of Mariah's impeccable work record. His computer screen glowed as he drafted emails to board members he'd known for years, calling in favors and making his case. Around 3 in the morning, his phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Documents ready for review." Ethan smiled grimly. Everything was falling into place. As dawn broke over the city, he stood before his mirror, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. The man staring back at him looked different somehow, less hardened, more alive. In his pocket, Catherine's necklace sat in a small velvet box, a reminder of what truly mattered. His phone buzzed again. Richard had sent the final versions of all documents, along with a surprising discovery about the source of the rumors against Mariah. Ethan's jaw tightened as he read the information. "Time to make things right," he muttered, gathering his briefcase. The elevator ride down from his penthouse felt longer than usual. Each floor that passed brought him closer to a moment of truth, not just for Mariah's future, but for his own. He'd spent years building walls to protect himself from pain, only to realize he'd been walling himself off from joy as well. In the lobby, his driver waited with the car door open. "To the hospital, sir?" Ethan nodded, his grip firm on his briefcase. Inside were the documents that would change multiple lives. Most importantly, the lives of a dedicated nurse and her remarkable daughter who had somehow found their way into his carefully guarded heart. As the car pulled away from his building, Ethan gazed out at the morning traffic. Somewhere out there, Mariah was probably packing up her new apartment, preparing to leave the city. Grace was likely asking again about Mr. Sunshine, her innocent nickname for him, now a bittersweet reminder of his failure to stand by them. "Not this time," he promised quietly. "I won't let fear of love cost me another family." The car turned onto the hospital's main drive, its familiar facade looming ahead. Ethan straightened his shoulders, checked that all his documents were in order one final time, and took a deep breath. The board meeting would start in 30 minutes. He stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, his expression set with determination. The morning sun caught his face as he strode toward the hospital entrance, each step purposeful and sure. The security guard nodded in recognition as he passed. But Ethan barely noticed. His mind was focused on one thing, making things right. The hospital boardroom felt cold and sterile, much like an operating theater. Mariah sat rigidly in her chair, facing the row of stern faces across the long mahogany table. Her navy scrubs, usually a source of pride, felt like a suit of armor that was slowly cracking. "Miss Johnson," Dr. Harrison, the chief of medicine, adjusted his glasses. "These are serious allegations, Accepting gifts from patients violates our ethical guidelines. Mariah's hands trembled in her lap. I understand how it looks, but, and this apartment, another board member cut in, consulting her notes. Quite generous for a mere patient-nurse relationship, wouldn't you say? The word mere stung like alcohol on an open wound. Mariah straightened her spine, trying to find her voice. Mr. Callahan offered help when he learned about my situation. I never asked, "Yet you accepted," Dr. Harrison interrupted. "Along with a piano for your daughter, if I'm not mistaken?" Tears pricked at the corners of Mariah's eyes, but she blinked them back. These people didn't know about the endless nights working 3 jobs, about Grace falling asleep waiting for her mother to come home, about the constant struggle just to keep their heads above water. "I've always conducted myself professionally," Mariah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I would never." The boardroom door swung open with such force that everyone jumped. Ethan Callahan strode in, his presence filling the room like a thundercloud. He wore an impeccable charcoal suit, but his face carried the intensity of a brewing storm. "Mr. Callahan," Dr. Harrison stood quickly. "This is a private meeting. A meeting about my private nurse." Ethan's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I believe that makes it my business." He moved to stand beside Mariah's chair. She could feel the energy radiating off him, like electricity before lightning strikes. "Let me be crystal clear," Ethan continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "Mariah Johnson never asked me for a single thing. Not money, not housing, not even additional hours. In fact, she refused my help multiple times." Mariah's heart pounded against her ribs. She hadn't seen Ethan since he'd pulled away, since the rumors had started spreading like wildfire through the hospital corridors. "Mr. Callahan," a board member leaned forward, "while we appreciate your input, there are protocols." "Protocols?" Ethan's laugh was sharp. "Let's talk about protocols. Let's talk about a nurse who works 3 jobs to support her daughter, who shows up every day with compassion and dignity, despite exhaustion, who treated me not as a CEO, but as a human being when I was at my lowest." He placed a hand on the back of Mariah's chair, and she felt its warmth through the plastic. "If you want to investigate someone's ethics," he continued, "investigate the system that forces dedicated healthcare workers to choose between caring for their patients and feeding their children." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Callahan, while your concern is admirable—" "I'm not finished." Ethan's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of authority. "Every gift I gave was of my own volition. Every act of kindness was met with reluctance and gratitude from Nurse Johnson. She has shown nothing but integrity in her work, and if you can't see that, perhaps you need to reevaluate your own ethical standards." Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Mariah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the weight of unshed tears behind her eyes. Dr. Harrison exchanged glances with his colleagues before speaking. Given Mr. Callahan's testimony, and reviewing Nurse Johnson's spotless record, he paused, removing his glasses. "We find no evidence of misconduct. The investigation is closed." Relief flooded through Mariah's body, but it felt distant, unreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. The board members began gathering their papers, murmuring among themselves. "Nurse Johnson," Dr. Harrison added, almost as an afterthought, "you may return to your regular duties immediately." Mariah nodded, unable to form words. She stood on shaky legs, gathering her belongings. The victory felt hollow somehow, tainted by the suspicion she'd endured, by the whispers that would likely continue in the halls. As the board members filed out, Mariah remained rooted to her spot, clutching her bag like a lifeline. She'd been cleared, yes, but everything still felt fragile, like a soap bubble that might burst at the slightest touch. The future stretched before her, uncertain and frightening despite this momentary reprieve. She turned to thank Ethan, but he was already engaged in a quiet conversation with Dr. Harrison by the door. Their voices were too low to hear, but the intensity on Ethan's face spoke volumes. Mariah stood alone in the middle of the boardroom, surrounded by empty chairs and the lingering echo of accusations, wondering if anything would ever truly feel secure again. The corridor outside the boardroom was quiet now, the tension from the meeting still lingering in the air like a heavy cloud. Mariah leaned against the wall, her legs shaky from the emotional strain of defending herself before the board. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that matched her exhausted state. "Mariah?" Ethan's voice was gentle, so different from his commanding presence in the boardroom moments ago. "Could we talk somewhere private?" She nodded, following him to a small consultation room down the hall. The space was intimate, with 2 comfortable chairs and a window overlooking the city. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow across the room, softening the clinical environment. Ethan closed the door behind them, his usual confidence seeming to waver. He looked different now, vulnerable, almost nervous. His hands fidgeted with something in his suit jacket pocket. "I need to tell you something," he began, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "And I hope you'll understand why I did what I did." Mariah's heart thumped loudly in her chest. After everything that had happened, she wasn't sure she could handle any more surprises. "Remember when you first told me about the eviction notice?" Ethan's voice was soft, careful. "That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of you and Grace losing your home." He paused, swallowing hard. "I couldn't let that happen." He pulled an envelope from his jacket, his hands trembling slightly as he held it out to her. "I bought the building, Mariah." The words hung in the air between them. Mariah stared at the envelope, not reaching for it. "You... what?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "I purchased the entire building." Ethan's words tumbled out faster now. "Not just your apartment, the whole complex. I couldn't risk another owner coming in and forcing you out again. And this." He gestured to the envelope. "This is the deed to your apartment. It's yours now." Mariah's legs gave way, and she sank into one of the chairs. "Ethan, I can't. This is too much. Way too much. Please." He moved closer, kneeling beside her chair. "This isn't charity, Mariah. You have to understand that." His eyes searched hers, full of emotion. "When I came to this hospital, I was just another wealthy man hiding behind his money and power. But you and Grace, you saw me. Really saw me." Tears began rolling down Mariah's cheeks. "We just treated you like a person," she whispered. "Exactly." Ethan's voice cracked. "Do you know how long it's been since anyone did that? Since anyone looked past the CEO title and the bank account?" He placed the envelope in her hands. "This isn't charity, it's gratitude. And," he hesitated, his own eyes growing moist, "maybe something more." Mariah's fingers trembled as she held the envelope. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it. Not for me, but for Grace, for yourself." His hand covered hers, warm and steady. "You deserve stability, Mariah. You deserve to know that you and Grace will always have a home." The tears came faster now, and Mariah couldn't hold back a sob. Years of struggle, of lying awake wondering how to make ends meet, of working herself to exhaustion. It all came pouring out. Ethan's hand remained on hers, anchoring her through the storm of emotions. "I never wanted to burden anyone," she managed between sobs. "After Tom died, I promised myself I'd make it on my own." "You're not burdening anyone," Ethan said firmly. "You're accepting love. There's a difference." The word love hung in the air between them, delicate and powerful at once. Before either could speak again, the door burst open with the energy only a 7-year-old could possess. "Mommy! Mr. Sunshine!" Grace bounded into the room, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. She must have just arrived with the hospital daycare worker who usually watched her after school. Grace's face lit up at the sight of Ethan, and she threw herself into his arms without hesitation. "You came back! I knew you would!" Ethan caught her easily, his formal business demeanor melting away as he hugged her tight. "Of course I did, sweetheart. I missed you too much to stay away." Grace pulled back, her small hands framing Ethan's face with complete seriousness. "Now you'll never leave us again." The simple certainty in her voice made both adults catch their breath. Mariah watched as Ethan hugged Grace closer, his eyes meeting hers over the little girl's shoulder. In that moment, she saw everything he couldn't say out loud. The loneliness he'd carried, the healing her daughter's innocent love had brought him, and the future he dared to hope for. Grace squirmed out of Ethan's arms and noticed the envelope in her mother's hands.
"What's that, Mommy? Is it a letter?"
Mariah looked down at the deed in her hands, then back at Ethan and Grace. The paper suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a promise, not just of a home, but of something deeper. something that felt remarkably like family. The late afternoon sun streamed through freshly cleaned windows, casting warm patches of light across the familiar wooden floors of their apartment. Mariah stood in the living room, watching as Grace carefully arranged her stuffed animals on her bed, just as she had done countless times before. But something felt different now. The walls that had once seemed to close in with worry now embraced them with security. "Mommy, everything feels better now," Grace said, hugging her favorite teddy bear. "Even Mr. Snuggles thinks so." Mariah smiled, running her hand along the windowsill. Their windowsill. The thought still made her heart skip a beat. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her reverie. Mrs. Martinez from next door stood in the hallway, holding a homemade casserole. "Welcome home, owners," she beamed, emphasizing the last word with pride. "We've missed you both so much." "Thank you," Mariah's voice caught with emotion as she accepted the dish. The aroma of cheese and spices filled the air. "This means so much to us." Throughout the afternoon, more neighbors stopped by. Mr. Chen from upstairs brought fresh oranges. The Rodriguez twins from across the hall made a welcome home card with wobbly letters and too much glitter. Each visitor's eyes held respect and warmth, seeing not the woman who had faced scandal, but the fighter who had emerged stronger. Grace bounced between visitors, proudly showing off her piano keyboard, which now had a permanent spot in the corner of the living room. "Mr. Sunshine helped me learn this song," she announced to anyone who would listen, plinking out a simple melody. "Mr. Sunshine?" Mrs. Martinez raised an eyebrow with a knowing smile. "That's what she calls Ethan," Mariah explained, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "He's been very kind to us." As if summoned by his nickname, Ethan appeared in the doorway, looking far more relaxed in jeans and a casual shirt than he ever had in his hospital gown. The neighbor's eyes widened slightly. It wasn't every day you saw a billionaire CEO in your hallway, but Ethan's genuine smile put them at ease. "Mr. Sunshine," Grace launched herself at him, and he caught her with practiced ease, twirling her once before setting her down. "Come see my room. I arranged everything just like before, but better." Ethan let himself be dragged along, ducking his head to avoid hitting the doorframe. "Better than before? I didn't think that was possible." His voice carried from the bedroom, followed by Grace's giggles. The neighbors gradually filtered out, leaving behind warmth, food, and well wishes. Mariah began putting away the dishes, pausing every so often to listen to Grace chattering away to Ethan about her plans for her room's decoration. "And here's where I'm going to put my trophy when I become a famous pianist," Grace declared seriously. "Is that so?" Ethan's deep chuckle resonated through the apartment. "Well, we better get practicing then." Their footsteps padded across the floor, and soon the simple melody Grace had been learning filled the space. Mariah wiped her hands on a dish towel and moved to the doorway of the living room, leaning against the frame. Ethan sat beside Grace on the piano bench, his large frame somehow making the small keyboard look even smaller. His fingers gently guided hers over the keys, showing her where to place them for the next note. The afternoon sun caught them both in its glow, turning Grace's hair to spun gold and softening Ethan's usually sharp features. "That's it," he encouraged as Grace successfully completed a difficult passage. "You're getting better every day. Soon I'll be able to play all the songs in the world," Grace announced with the complete confidence of a 7-year-old. "All the songs?" Ethan raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "That might take a while. That's okay." Grace shrugged, her fingers still moving over the keys. "You'll be here to help me learn them all, right?" The question hung in the air for a moment, weighted with more meaning than Grace probably intended. Ethan's eyes met Mariah's across the room, and the look they shared made her heart flutter. "Yes," he said softly, still holding Mariah's gaze. "I'll be here." Grace nodded, satisfied, and launched into another practice piece. The simple melody floated through the apartment, mixing with the golden afternoon light. Mariah watched as Ethan patiently corrected Grace's finger placement, showing her how to make the notes flow more smoothly. This was what peace felt like, Mariah realized. Not the absence of struggle or the end of all worries, but this. The safety of home, the warmth of community, and the presence of love in all its unexpected form. Her heart felt full to bursting as she watched her daughter and the man who had become so much more than just a patient share their music in the afternoon light. Grace's song filled their apartment, their home, and Mariah knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. The melody wrapped around them like a embrace, holding this perfect moment in its notes. a promise of all the beautiful moments yet to come. The concert hall hummed with quiet anticipation as parents and relatives filed into their seats. Mariah smoothed her navy blue dress, the nicest one she owned, and felt Ethan's steady presence beside her. His hand found hers in the dimming light, warm and reassuring. "She's going to do wonderfully," Ethan whispered, giving her fingers a gentle squeeze. Mariah nodded, too nervous to speak. Her daughter, her precious Grace, would be performing third in the children's piano recital. They'd practiced for weeks, Grace's small fingers dancing across the keyboard while humming along with pure joy. The first two students played their pieces, one stumbling slightly, the other performing with careful precision. Then Grace's name was called. Mariah's breath caught as her daughter walked onto the stage. Grace wore a white dress with a pink sash, her dark curls neatly tied back with matching ribbons. She looked so small next to the grand piano, but her smile lit up the entire room. "That's my sunshine," Ethan murmured proudly. Grace sat at the piano, adjusted her seat just like she'd practiced, and placed her hands on the keys. The moment she began to play, Mariah's eyes welled with tears. The melody was simple but sweet, Amazing Grace, arranged for beginners. But Grace played it with such natural feeling, such pure emotion, that it felt like hearing the song for the first time. Ethan's grip on Mariah's hand tightened. She glanced at him and saw moisture in his eyes too. This man, who'd once seemed so cold and unreachable, now wore his heart openly on his sleeve, at least for them. Grace swayed gently as she played, lost in the music. When she reached the final notes, her face glowed with accomplishment. The audience burst into applause, and Grace stood to take a small bow, just as her teacher had taught her. "That's our girl," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our girl." The words settled in Mariah's heart like a warm blanket. After the recital, Grace ran to them, still buzzing with excitement. "Did you hear me? Did you like it? I didn't mess up once." "You were amazing, sweetheart." Mariah knelt to hug her daughter tight. "I'm so proud of you." "Come here, sunshine." Ethan lifted Grace high in the air, making her giggle. "You played beautifully. I think we need to celebrate." They decided to walk home through the city streets rather than take Ethan's car. The spring evening was perfect warm, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming trees. Street lamps cast a golden glow over the sidewalks, and stars peeked through gaps in the buildings above. Grace skipped ahead of them, still humming her recital piece. She stopped to twirl occasionally, her white dress spinning like a dancer's costume. "Careful not to get too far ahead," Mariah called out, though she couldn't help smiling at her daughter's joy. Ethan's arm slipped around Mariah's waist as they walked. She leaned into him slightly, savoring the simple pleasure of being together like this. No crisis looming, no whispered rumors, to fear just peace and contentment. They passed the hospital where it had all begun. The windows glowed warmly against the deepening twilight. Mariah remembered those early days, her exhaustion, her worry, the weight of so many burdens. She remembered meeting Ethan for the first time, never imagining how he would change their lives. "Penny for your thoughts?" Ethan asked softly. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," Mariah replied. "Sometimes it feels like a dream." Grace ran back to them then, grabbing both their hands. "Swing me," she demanded with a laugh. They obliged, lifting her between them as they walked. Grace counted, 1, 2, 3. On 3, they swung her forward, her laughter echoing off the buildings. A couple passing by smiled at them. "What a beautiful family," the woman remarked to her companion. Family. The word settled over them like a blessing. They weren't quite there yet. Ethan and Mariah were still taking things slowly, building their relationship with care and intention. But moments like this made Mariah's heart swell with possibility. They reached their apartment building, their home, thanks to Ethan's generosity. Grace was beginning to tire, her steps dragging slightly. "I think someone's ready for bed," Mariah observed. "But I'm not sleepy," Grace protested through a yawn. "How about I carry you the rest of the way?" Ethan offered. Grace nodded and reached up to him. He scooped her into his arms, and she immediately nestled against his shoulder. As they climbed the stairs to their floor, Mariah watched them together. Ethan carried Grace so naturally, as if he'd been doing it for years instead of months. Her daughter had worked her way into his heart just as surely as she'd worked her way into his life with pure, unguarded love. Inside their apartment, Grace was barely awake. Mariah helped her change into pajamas while Ethan waited in the living room. When Grace was tucked into bed, she insisted on a goodnight hug from both of them. "Thank you for coming to my recital, Mr. Sunshine," she mumbled sleepily. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," Ethan replied, kissing her forehead. They stood in the doorway watching as Grace drifted off to sleep, the evening's excitement finally catching up with her. The moonlight filtered through her window, casting a gentle glow over her peaceful face. Back in the living room, Mariah stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Ethan's arms encircled her from behind, and she relaxed against him with a contented sigh. "What are you thinking about now?" he asked. "About miracles," she replied softly. "About how sometimes they don't come the way we expect." She turned in his arms to face him. "For the first time, I know miracles don't only fall from heaven, they rise from human hearts willing to love again. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Mariah Johnson, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.